Hi, everybody. How are you? Welcome to this very special webinar. We are here together celebrating the life of George Nkencho. And we're here to discuss the Irish identity, media and public representation, and speech and hate speech legislation for Ireland. It's pretty much just we young people coming together to kind of have a conversation around, what has happened and literally to process it all. Don't forget, you can actually go on Twitter to use the hashtag Justice for George Nkencho if you wanted. But just really quickly, it'll be nice to just go around and, get the panelists to introduce themselves. I don't think I'm worthy to do it, so I'd have them do it and talk about themselves real quick. So we'll start with Mamobo.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me. My internet has been a bit shaky today, so I hope everything is okay on my side, just tell me. But my name is Mamobo Ogoro. I am a PhD student at the University of Limerick. I'm doing my PhD in social psychology and applied linguistics in UL. So my PhD involves the study of identity and multicultural identities in Ireland. So as we see now in Ireland over the past let's say 30 years, Ireland has kind of come into this new sense of multiculturalism. And what I want to study is the generations after the huge kind of migration after in Ireland. So the children of migrants and their children to see how their identities are formed, shaped, and how it's manifested in real life and in language as well. So just a reflection on everything that has happened with the death of George Nkencho. It was kind of it was very shocking on my part. I know for me, the first kind of sentiment I had was like my in-group bias, I would like to call it. But it's like, oh my God, it has started with us now. Oh my God, it's starting. And then kind of logic kind of hit back in to start thinking about it in a logical way. But the first feeling I had was kind of terror and fear, and then just shock. So, and then after that, we needed to kind of reflect on that. And this is kind of what we're doing in conversations right now, and just having an open conversations with Black Irish people and having us talk about it in a way that is healthy, and having that healthy dialogue between ourselves and reflecting that back to the wider community. So I think this is part of the healing process for a lot of people.
Thank you, Mamobo. Yeah, you've pretty much just got into your first reaction when you heard about that real quick then, I would assume. So can we have Vicky go next? It'll be nice if you introduce yourself and kind of just told us what your initial reaction is and how you feel right now.
Hello, my beautiful people. I'm Vicky, aka Vicky Inspires, aka I'm a social media influencer. So I'm a breath of fresh air, good vibes. And I had to be here, and I'm so happy when Mamobo reached out to me to be part of this panel. I actually knew George Nkencho personally myself. We used to hang around together in the same teenage group. So you can imagine my shock when I heard that George died. I was like, what? He was shot in front of his house by Gardaí. And they're like, and I never look at graphic videos, but I found myself kind of having to watch the video to make sure that it's actually him that died. So that one that went off from Snapchat, the video that kept going around when he was shot in the back and stuff, I saw that. I couldn't sleep for a week. The past month has been hard because I've been very vocal and kind of seeking for justice for George Nkencho, because it's not okay. I'm a mom as well, actually, believe it or not. I know, somebody's mom. I'm a 9-year-old and a 3-year-old. So that's what I mean, this could leave. I came to Ireland when I was 6, so, and I'm turning 29 now. So I'm looking at it from different angles as a mom, as a, I don't know, would I have been second generation Black Irish? I don't know. Yeah, because I would have came, our parents would have been migrants, and then we came, and then now I have my own kids born here. So yeah, so I'm kind of seeking for help for us. We have a lot of work to do, but let's have these chats, and that's me done.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Quite inspiring there. Going up next with this, Sandrine, I'm just going according to how I can see it on my screen here. So Sandrine, would you please introduce yourself and tell us your initial reaction when you heard of the demise of George?
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Sandrine Ndahiro and I am a second year PhD student in UL. So my research focuses on African temporality. So just by looking at the essence of Africans always being portrayed as the antithesis to Europe and always that sense of always catching up. So then I look at the concept of time through ecology and just see how that can go. And then like even from last year, like when Black Lives Matter reemerged in Ireland, like I think it was like a moment for me to kind of start speaking out. So like I did the documentary on silencing Black voices. And I think when like my initial reaction like to when George Nkencho died, it was like we literally did a documentary about Black Lives Matter, but it was to do with the reaction of another George in America. So like I remember like when I went on Twitter and I was seeing that trending and I was like, oh, that's in America. I didn't even click into it. And then like the moment I realized it was Ireland, like I don't think like I just turned off my phone straight away because I was like, how is this real? Like last year, all like throughout from June onwards, we were all screaming Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. But it was always like in the context of, oh, we're borrowing that from America and applying it to Ireland. So I think it was a very harsh reality of just being like, oh my God, we've just caught up to America. We are becoming like that. So I think it was just that fear because I've been so vocal about it last year, but I've always thought that it was just by talking about like how racism in Ireland is subtle or microaggression, but just never police brutality. So it was just something that I never thought that I'd have to talk about in my wildest dream.
Well, thank you for that, Sandrine. We have a bit of a celebrity here with us. If you have watched RT recently, then you would know Buisir. Thank you very much, Buisir, for joining us. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us your initial reactions as well?
I'm no star by all means, but I'm privileged to be here. So my name is Buisir. I'm also a PhD student in UCD School of Law and of Politics, where I'm doing my research on citizenship, which is multidisciplinary, so crosses a wide array of fields, including sociology, where I look at identity, more specifically national identity, and what that means as differentiated from ethnic identity, for example, and things like that. And so really my kind of focus is on looking at these socio-legal understandings and how they play out in real life. And unfortunately, you know, when I heard of George, like many of you, first it was shock. I couldn't believe it because it was actually my friends that called me and said, hey, did you hear of George? And I was like, mate, that was so last summer. You know, and it's like, no, George, like from, you know, down the road, like, and I was like, what? So I called my friends anyways. We all had our, you know, our group chat, and, you know, I was going through the media, and of course you get the same kind of justifications and the, you know, he deserves it, he's a thug and all those kind of rhetoric. And, you know, the fear wasn't, oh my God, it's happening now in Ireland. It's, oh my God, now it's come to the extreme end of racism. We've always known racism exists, even, you know, beyond Black people or ethnic minorities. We only need to look at the traveler community here in this very country, you know, and it's not even a matter of, you know, color in this instance. And so racism has existed in Ireland. We just turn a blind eye to it. Us Irish people, Black or white, we tend to be kind of sensitive about some issues. And I know this because I've been here for 22 years. So I always consider myself as an unintended ethnographer because I suppose I've taken in these diverse viewpoints, both from the white community, the Irish community, the Black community, Nigerian community, and so forth. And so I'm able to make those assessments. And the assessment I've come to is that we just don't like talking about race. We dismiss it as banter and we dismiss it as crack. But in reality, these are issues that, although they seem negligent or innocent enough at the start, you know, at the face of it, it seems innocent. But the reality is that, you know, these people who should have been apprehended for, you know, racism, but were dismissed for bullying in schools, now have a uniform and have a role to protect us. But because they haven't been taught of the impact of racism, they have, I suppose, the disregard, whether, on purpose or not, but they do have a disregard for Black lives, such as racial profiling, for example, which happens a lot. Now we've just witnessed the extreme end of it. Now we don't know whether racism came into play. I know that's up for discussion, and that's why we're having these debates. But by the very fact that there was a difference in this situation, in the sense of the lack of precedence, but more specifically, the visual difference, we need to acknowledge that there is a difference here. That there, especially when we know that there is ingrained racism within the Garda Síochána itself. So how are we not to question and say, this is the first death of a Black man by the Gardaí? Of course, we're going to question whether race was a motive. Now, the answer is a completely different discussion. But the fact is that we must ask the question, and that's my fear, that's my anger, is that enough is enough of this dismissal. Now with Judge Floyd, there was that powerlessness. Oh, what can I do here in a faraway country? But, as I said in my article, silence is compliance. And I found myself to be compliance to this racism because I'm not saying anything about it. I, as a key witness or as a key victim of racism throughout my life, have some sort of duty, because we don't like to talk about it, to make people uncomfortable, because I've been uncomfortable for years. And look, if you have to suffer a little bit of discomfort for 10 to 20 minutes while we have this discussion, well, then so be it. Because if the end result is that you start to self-reflect and making your way to becoming an anti-racist, well, then the job is done. I've said a lot already, so why don't I stop there and then we can continue? Sorry, I tend to go off on the flow, so yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Buisir. Yeah, I can see the passion there, and it is a very passionate topic, and I can understand it. So we have Eric going next. He's also one of the celebrities on Gorm TV already. So yes, you'd introduce yourself, please, and then tell us your first reactions.
Of course. So my name is Eric Ahige. I'm studying law and business in NUI Galway. So like Buisir, but not as illustrious as Buisir. I'm operating within the legal sphere, academically speaking, though. In terms of, I'm also a part of Gorm TV, as you said, and I'm also the political coordinator of Black and Irish, which is a kind of initiative that works to try and aggrandize the voices of young Black Irish people and the Black and mixed race community here in Ireland. In terms of my initial reaction, I think, we have to remember that, young Black people in this country had to react to the tragic death of a Black man off the backdrop of 2020. And I think understanding 2020 puts the reaction of many young Black people into its proper context. 2020 was a year in which we saw, George Floyd being killed in our face, on the screen. Many Black people had to actually witness that and watch it. Thereafter, we had the NSARS movement arise in Nigeria, where we had police brutality, arising as an issue, and where we saw videos and pictures of dead, Nigerian people who are also Black, who were killed by the hands of, corrupt police officers in Nigeria. So considering just a year of sweltering emotion, such a loaded year where all we had to see was many Black people being killed by the hands of police, initially seeing the killing of George Nkencho struck just a reminiscent feeling to the feeling I had in 2020. Because in 2020, at the end of all my discussions with my ethnically white Irish friends and my Black Irish friends, I always found comfort in the fact that I could say, well, at least it's not here. But after seeing the killing of George Nkencho, I feel as if that comfort was debunked because I saw, a Black person being killed. And I think, that was my initial reaction. It was very much based on 2020. But during this period as well, during this environment, the public reaction from the wider society was something I really did not expect. A lot of Black people were frustrated, especially young Black people. But instead of people, accommodating the fact that Black people had a very tough 2020 and bearing that in mind, catering to the Black community, I think there was a sense here in Ireland of just, blamelessness. People felt as if race couldn't be involved in this whatsoever. And despite the existence of or non-existence of race in the case of George Nkencho, I feel there should have been a general willingness from the wider society to comfort the Black Irish community, especially off the backdrop of 2020. It also helped me put the reaction to the killing of George Floyd into its proper context. It felt as if people were just allocating blame of racism, especially malicious manifestations of racism, to the United States of America and dismissing the the idea, the possibility of racism existing here in Ireland. And I think there's a cruel irony in this, because according to all the research and studies done by esteemed bodies here in Ireland, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, the Economic Social Research Institute, it shows that racism does exist in Ireland. According to reports like the Iona report in the early 2000s, it shows that racism and racial profiling might exist in An Garda Síochána, and the people that are subjected worst to this are people within the traveling community and the Black community. So even though the evidence points towards the existence of racism and should mandate us to want to have a conversation about how racism does exist and how we should eradicate it, our national conversation seems to be stuck in questioning whether racism exists. And I think this is really regressive and backwards. And I noticed this after the killing of George Nkencho. It revealed a lot of the flaws in how we operate as a nation when it comes to acknowledging racism. And I hope conversation like this can move the general national conversation forward so we can actually start making some positive changes.
Thank you very much for that, Eric. Very, very detailed one there. Just to kind of reiterate or go back a little bit, I would just like to quickly recognize Mamobo, say big shout out to her for putting all of this together. Also, just to acknowledge that we were supported, this webinar has been supported by DOCAS alumni and Limerick Movement Against Racism. And then let's just take a step back a little bit. I think we already got a bit ahead there, talking about the reactions and how we feel, but let's first of all just ask a more generic question, and this question will be going to both Mamobo and Sandrine. What exactly would you say Afro-Irish identity is? Because I think this is something that is still lost on a lot of people. Because when you hear an Irish person, I before I came to Ireland would think a white person. Do you know what I mean? Like, but then there is now this community and these people who are also Irish, and it would be nice if you just kind of gave us a brief into that.
Perfect. Thanks, Funmi, for that, and thanks everyone for speaking. I really enjoyed hearing your intros. So my research is on multicultural identities and how they are formed and how they are manifested in the real world. So previous research in like multicultural identities and social identity in Ireland is like very seldom. There hasn't been a lot of research there on the multiplicities of cultural identities in Ireland. And often at times we see in like the public sphere that people don't understand, like Bashi was saying, the difference between ethnic identity and national identity. And then how those two can be separate but blended in at the same time. So when we're talking about Afro-Irish identity, it's this amalgamation of both your ethnic identity and both your national identity at the same time. A lot of people, particularly the youth in Ireland, the Black youth in Ireland, a lot of them adopt this sort of identity because they were born or they grew up in this culture, in this environment. And then having gone through, like, let's say, the school system, having gone to the Gael talks, having gone to the Debs, everything, they kind of adopt this identity, this Irishness within them. And a lot of times when it's reflected back into the wider society, it may not be seen that way because of the pigment in their skin. So when we're talking about our Afro-Irish identity, we're talking about both the adoption and accepting of both, I like to call it bicultural identity, but adopting and accepting both the national and ethnic cultures and putting them into one. There's this, I've talked about this previously, but I'm loving this book. There's this book called Afro-European that I'm reading, and it's a journey of the Afro-European identity, and it really goes into detail, though they don't speak about the Afro-Irish identity, it really goes into detail of the historical context and the modern context of the Afro-European identities. And one of them was how we see second generation people. So I like to define second generation as people who were born into a new culture, let's say, with migrant parents, or they grew up into that culture from childhood, let's say like 10 and under, because you don't really form who you are as a child until you're like in your teens or late teens. So there's just like part of the book that I really, really think that kind of reflects how the young people are feeling now. The author is talking about France, but just for the context of this conversation, I'm going to change it to Ireland, because it's really reflective of how I perceived the reflections, particularly on media, the reflections of George Nkencho's death. So the author says here, this is why the second generation of Black community in Ireland are angrier generation. They were taught to believe that they were Irish, but in reality, the government only see them as foreigners. When Black people in Ireland are truly considered Irish, that is when Ireland will be a country that it claims to be. So I think on the surface level, with the second generation particularly, or with all Black people that have found Ireland as their home, on the surface level, we are saying that, okay, you're part of us, you're part of our community and things like that. But when deeper issues of racism, when deeper issues of discrimination come about, there's this sort of like deflecting, and there's this sort of like, oh, we just want to throw that under the rug. So I think we need to have these sort of uncomfortable conversations to actually push this forward and actually see the particularly younger generations, because they're the future, and actually see these people of who they are and see their blended identities as something that is normal and manageable here in Ireland. So that's how I'm going to just quickly introduce it.
Thank you very much for that. Sandrine, are you okay to just butt in now, just to give us an insight into what Irishness is today?
Yeah, no, I think with Irishness, it's something that I think like I've always struggled to kind of understand, because as Mamobo said, like I was like originally from Rwanda, so like I've been here like since I was 10. So it's like Ireland is like all I know, you know, and it's like, but then like I had like my Rwandese side and then my Irish side, and like I've always just seen it as being both. But I think when it comes to the Irish identity, is always been questioned about it, do you know? So like even like the last day, like someone would be like, oh, like how long have you been in Ireland for? And I'm like, but why would you, like, you would not ask a white person this, you know? And it's that, like when I see it as like the Irish identity, it's beneficial when it's like, oh, like look how great, like there's like Ireland is like multicultural, like look, like even like an example, like when we did that Silencing Black Voices documentary, like that was like, we're so proud that they're Irish. But then I'm like, I know like if I was to do something wrong, I'd be like, oh yeah, like, oh, she's actually an immigrant, you know? So like it's with Irish identity, it's like it can be just taken away from me at any moment I mess up. So that's how I look at it. Like it's something that with identity, like it should be something that you just have. So it's like, I have my Irish passport, I have my Irish accent, I'm from Carlow, you know? So it's like, I can't make things up. But then it's like, when I just don't fit the mold, then it's like, okay, you're not Irish. So I think with that identity, and it's like embracing that duality, it's, I can embrace it myself, but the society around me won't, because it'll only be comfortable around it. So like, and I think it's something like when I was watching the interview with Buisir and he was talking about like, where are you really from? And I was like, that takes my Irish identity away. The moment someone asked me that, because it's not like it's in a curious sense. No, it's literally in, I can't place your accent, so you're not from here. Do you know, it's like, yeah, you're talking like, do you know, it's like, okay, you don't have a Limerick accent, you don't have a Carlow accent, but you also like, for me, it's like you don't have a Nigerian accent, because then even in Ireland, it's, if you're Black, you're Nigerian, do you know? And I'm like, no, I'm actually from Rwanda. So I think those are things like with the Irish identity, I've always been like, no, I'm not Nigerian. You do realize like Africa is a continent, not a country, like this and that. So it's always like that duality of it. But then knowing that I can be proud and say that I'm Irish, but I'm also like in the back of my head, I'm like, if I do something wrong, like it'll be very quick to be like, oh, the immigrant girl, or like this, it won't, my Irishness won't be secured in that regards. Yeah.
Very interesting one there. We've just got a comment from Andrew, just based off what you were saying there, Sandrine. And he said, what Sandrine is describing is exactly what Black footballers and athletes in the UK deal with. And that is a very, very valid one. We also had Rejoice say something about, can we highlight the fact that the educational system has a part to play? The fact that our educational platforms still don't reflect the community at large. How can they look out for the vulnerable people in our community when they still don't try to level up? And that just brings us back to the next question, which is about the media and how the death of George was represented in the Irish media. Let's just first of all circle back to, how do you believe that Afro-Irish people are reflected in the Irish media, first of all? And then, you know, I'm going to direct this to Vicky, and then later on we can just circle back to, you know, how do you think that the death of George was actually represented in the media as well. Anybody can butt in, you know, after you're done, Vicky. If you have a comment, just.
I can relate with Sandrine in so many ways, and her comment alone, she said there, I feel like how the Irish media represents us is like, if you do good, for example, let's say it's in the football and a league and you score, it's like, oh, Irish Eric, do you know what I mean? But if you mess up, you do something wrong, straight away, you're Nigerian. It's the whole where are you from originally kind of thing will come up, you know, and they want to kind of bring you back, you know. Irish media, when George Nkencho died, the editor, Dara Berry, called him a thug. And I called him out on that on LinkedIn, may I add, because he had to be called out. This man started boasting how he got 2 million views in 24 hours on the 30th when George died, and he called him a thug. And I was like, congratulations for your 2 million views in 24 hours. But George Nkencho was not a thug. He was a son. He was a brother. He was part of an organization called I Care for Black youth to help them with their mental health and stuff. He suffered with mental health issues. Why didn't he put that in the newspaper? Even he could have even said black guy dies, like shot, instead of calling him a thug, you know, or Nigerian, like originally from Nigerian guy and this and that. There was lies went around on social media that he had 32 convictions. He beat up his girlfriend with a hammer. She was in a domestic abusive relationship. There's a lot of horrible, disgusting stuff that was put up online about George. It was so disrespectful in so many ways. I'm like, wow. I remember last year when George Floyd died, and in Ireland, they're like, sure, that's an American thing. People actually said those words to me. Sure, that's an American thing. That doesn't happen here. Sure. That was May. June, July, August, September, October, November, December, 7 months difference. And here we are. I didn't see any black squares for George Nkencho. I didn't see anybody calling out people on thing. I didn't. I just saw, like Buisir said earlier, Ireland does have racists. It's always had racists, but like he said, we used to always kind of cover it like, oh, it's a bit of banter, it's this and that, but that's not okay. And I myself made a truce when George Floyd died in May that I would call out racist people, because something that has to be done. The media, there's not even many Black Irish people in the media either. So we're not represented at all here. Some of us, like, I'm like, what are we doing? You know? Sorry. That was a rant, but rant over for now. If anyone comes to add, you can add. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry there, Eric. I just wanted to quickly highlight the fact that what she mentioned was the lack of empathy by the media. It does sound like there was no empathy of any kind. He wasn't humanized, and it was almost like they were trying to make a villain of him just so that they could rationalize what had happened to him. And I also just want you, just as you're responding, Eric, I just want you to circle back as well to just respond to how you think with the media's representation and the way that they go about giving this news and the representation that they have of Afro-Irish people, how do you think this actually affects Black people as a community and actually affect the way that Black people are viewed in the community? Does it not fit into the stereotype, don't you think?
Absolutely. Sorry for cutting you off there. I'm just going to agree with what Vicky said, absolutely, and say that you actually took the words out of my mouth. I think, it's actually an age-old tactic that has been used, even in the USA, when it comes to the killing of many Black people. The first thing they do is they paint them as a thug. They associate Blackness with thuggishness, so it rationalizes the violence that Black person was met with. And unfortunately, we saw that here in Ireland. In terms of what the media depiction can do, in terms of convincing people in the public to think in a particular way about Black people, I think all we have to look is the major atrocities that occurred within Europe throughout the 20th century. Before any major atrocity occurred, the media had its role to play in painting a particular image, be it Black people in the United States of America or the Jewish community in Nazi Germany, of the marginalized community, so that the general public could get behind a particular negative message about that community to lead a bad act. So I think we've definitely saw that here. And the age-old stereotypical tropes that have been used to tar Black people, thug, criminal, these words have been associated to our community now, which has led the public to think in a particular way about us, which is very negative. So we need to try our best to try and curb that. And as Vicky said, representation. Once we have more people, once the plurality of Irish society is represented in the world of media, then we have people there that can curb efforts from people like the guy that Vicky spoke to on LinkedIn, who are trying to put out a negative image, because those people who are representative of a particular community can debunk those negative kind of images and rhetoric that come from people who don't understand the concerns and the true image of that community.
Thank you there, Eric. Okay, Mamobo, I think you wanna say something.
Definitely, I just want to add in there that when we want to add the representation into the media, it has to kind of steer away from sort of tokenistic ideas of what Black people are, or what Asian Irish people are, what Indian people are. It has to show them in sort of like a humanized way and tell stories that are aside from their ethnic or racial identity as well. So it's important to show the nuances in our stories, and it's important to show us, like, I don't know, something random like having a baby or something. I don't know. Just important to have these stories of Black people, have these stories of people of all different ethnic minorities, have them humanized rather than tokenized, if you get what I mean, in the media as well. So it's really important to have that.
Mambo, sorry, can I just add to what you said there, like you're saying about how they portray us? For example, if we look at how Black people are portrayed, we're portrayed as people, our moms are single moms, we have no dads, or our dad's in jail, or our dads are in a different thing, we're not educated, we have no prospects, we're poor. I remember growing up in school, for example, when we used to have to give choker boxes, and people in my class would be like, haha, Vicky, there's your brother. Oh, Africa's poor. Even my teacher, when I was in TY, said these words in my class. Oh, when I went to Africa, the Black kids were touching my skin and my hair, and they're like, oh, Africa's so poor, they live in shanty houses. And I called her out on it then again. I was like, are you telling me there's no homeless people in Ireland? So people really need to change their narrative. Like, you can't be wearing Tupac tops from Boohoo and listen to Black music and our culture, or going to get lip fillers, or wearing wigs. And then people are laughing. I'm sorry, like, I'm fuming. This has been a long time coming. Thank God for this platform today. It had to be said. You cannot do that. Or you can't be like, oh, I have Black in my family, or I have a mixed race, for example, niece or nephew. I'm not racist. No, you can be racist and have those things. And that's why I feel like we really need to call people out on stuff. You have to. It's not okay anymore. It's not even about us. We're getting old. 29 is old. We have to do it for the ones after us. You know, all kids who were born in 2000 are now 21. I feel really old. So we need to do it for them. Okay?
If I could just come in there, I think the not the only solution, but a key solution, as I think we've mentioned it 3 times now, is representation. And representation matters a lot, especially when we're talking about these media portrayal. Because remember, a lot of this racism isn't born out of, clear racism. People, by and large, the Irish people don't intend rather to be racist. It's just through a pure lack of ignorance and a unwillingness to learn or to change or to adapt. And when we have essentially white people telling Black history, telling Black stories, it is not Black history. It is not Black stories. They are not Black voices. Those are white voices. using Black data as evidence to support their own agenda, prejudiced or otherwise. And so the problem is that with the media is that if we don't have people, the correct people telling their own stories, then what we have is a misrepresentation of truth. And if your prejudice or your unconscious bias goes unchecked, what happens is you let misinformation and disinformation, which is what happened with George Nkencho and his media portrayal, is that, we just don't have any fact checking. Because we've accepted, as Eric so eloquently put it, we've accepted the media portrayal. And so it's been ingrained in us into accepting that this is the way Black men behave when they're angry or whatever. And so their death is justified. But that's not always the case. But that's the situation when we have people telling stories about us that go unchecked. And so to remedy that, what we need is representation. Clear representation, the whole rhetoric of nothing about us without us. And so that applies throughout the entire public and private sphere. Representation is key. So we can get people to tell their own stories, so we can write our own stories. And it's only and I hear a lot about the cancel culture, or we shouldn't be doing that, we shouldn't be erasing history. We are not erasing history, we are creating our futures. And that's the difference. And the difference is that we are being vocal, not so much as, they just want to complain, or they're angry, or they're youths, they have nothing to do because they're COVID. No, we are trying to create, as Vicky just said, we're trying to create a future for our children, for the next generation, because we grew up here, as Sandrine said earlier on, we grew up here with the notion that we are Irish, but it transpires that we are only as Irish when it comes to our successes or when it comes to our own personal identity. When I travel abroad, and I always say this, my Irishness is only questioned when I'm in Ireland. If I go to Spain and I say I'm from Ireland, they will take me to the local Irish pub. I could be in Estonia and they will show me where the next Irish pub is. But I say that I'm Irish in Ireland and there's a whole problem. And so again, representation matters a lot, just a lot, just so we can get people telling their own stories and not misrepresented versions of truths. So yeah, that's what I just wanted to add.
Thank you there, Buisir. Thank you. Just off of what you said, this comment says, this is from John. It says, I'm struck by the statement, where are you from? As a white Irish, I can recall when there was no Afro-Irish in Limerick. Sometimes these questions are asked out of ignorance. I heard Buisir on Tommy Tiernan. There is a need for this. There is no need for this. There's a need for this insensitivity to be addressed. From my experience, just to complete that there, he says, we Irish are racist and the Irish in the USA are the same. And that's coming from John. Interesting outlook there. Just to get a general sense of it, there's a lot of comments coming on. Somebody asked this question, and I think it'd be an interesting one for you guys to answer. This is just off of the question that I wanted to ask about how did you think the media could have covered the death of George. This person has also asked, one has to ask, where did those negative stories about George come from and why were they enabled with no fact checking? That's coming from Andrew. Does anybody want to just hop on that?
Yeah, I think it stems back to what Eric had said, even it can go back to as early as colonization and the description of the dehumanization of Black bodies. I think it's just a thing that it's a given fact. So even when I was on social media and I saw the word thug, I was like, can you be original? We've heard this before, what? I know it's maybe I'm dismissing of it, but it's I have heard of that, and it's it was the exact same with George Floyd, oh thug, oh violent, oh, and it's yeah, these are things that were described in travel writing books of cannibalism, savagery. It's can you not you have not learned from the past, and it's only being replicated now because it's in modern times, so but then it's no one is going to fact check it because it's just been a given thing. The dehumanization of Black bodies, or Black bodies just being seen as inhuman and just not important, has been there for centuries, and it's never been questioned, because even though it can be okay, yes, Black people are in power, Barack Obama was in power, this and that, it still transcends into now, and no one addresses that. And as you stated before, Funmi, when you're talking about the stereotypes, that feeds into that, you know. And like, yeah, like with Vicky with the trocar box, like it is like, so do you know, like whenever you do see a black man, like it's literally like you forget that, like, oh, that's my neighbor that I've known for like the last 20 years. No, it's, oh yeah, no, like, yeah, he deserved it because he was violent, because that's the type of, his people are like that, you know. So it does go back to centuries. And like, why does that do that? Because it is white people portraying that. It is those white people which are in power are writing those stories. Because if it was a black editor who was writing that, they would have a more common sense and would humanize the person. And like, that's where it is, there's no common sense, because black bodies that's just been a given thing. So like, you can't ask for empathy for people where for centuries have gotten away with dehumanizing the black body, of viewing the black body in a certain way. No one has ever questioned them. It's only ever black people which question them. And then when you do, you're fitting into that stereotype as well. As what Buisir said, it's like, you should only be so lucky to be in Ireland. Do you know, like that only happens in America. And it's like originality. Like, that's why I'm like, come up with something new, like heard that, been there, done that. So like, it becomes very frustrating then, like when you do see that, because it is paved way for black people then to write their own stories. So like, when you are asking like the question of what Irish identity is, you do have to give it from multiple perspectives. So not just with black people, like traveler, Asian, everything, like, you know, like Ireland is so multicultural, like you have to give it platform. And like, but that's never going to change if it's still white people in power writing about black bodies. And try, like, because even with that, like, oh, it was a misrepresentation, but like, if that was a black person, that would never have happened, because that's just common sense, and we're able to value black bodies. So I think it is that, like, where you do kind of have to pave way to understand that in order to try to depict Ireland, or like even when something like this tragedy happens, go to the source, ask like, why did no one not contact like Nigerian community to ask them, like, can you write a piece about this? Like, there are black people in Ireland, like I don't understand why no one was contacted. So like, even with the fact checking, like, yeah, why was that not, why were lawyers like Buisir not contacted to be like, is this true? Like, you know, it was just a given. And it's like, yeah, no wonder like it spread like fire, because then it did fit into their stereotype where no one wanted to question it, because it was just a black man. And it's like, what else would he not be doing if he wasn't convicted? Like, again, like originality, like, you know. So it's like, we have to just move past that, but we can't, because that those things have just been embedded within our society. And it's not just in America, it's not just in Ireland, it's just within the West. And that all goes back to like just the research that I do within the West and Africa. Like, it's just this level playing field that it's not changing. And like, it is like, as Vicky was saying, it is up to us then to create those spaces where we are talking about it, but we're talking about it in a way to be like, enough is enough. And it's not like, oh, I'm ungrateful of being Irish, like I'm Irish, like you can't take that away. But it's literally like, I just don't want to sit there. So then for like my future kids or my little brothers who have been born in Ireland to always be questioned about that, and for their black body to be dehumanized and like demonized at the same time.
Did anybody else want to add to that real quick? We just have a few comments here as well. Or were you going to say something, Vicky?
Yeah, I was going to say something like to what Sandrine said, to add on top. I feel like, oh my God, I'm after losing my train of thought. Oh, you said a lot, but you said so much that I agree with. No, I just will go with what Sandrine says. If I remember it, I'm sorry, I'll come back. I forgot.
Yeah, that happens. We just have a few comments here. It says, it is a common strategy for the police to disseminate stories that rubbish the victim. We also have Santi here say, beautifully said and such articulate discussion. So proud of the panel, their courage, strength, and dignity. Racism must be called out, and the truth of its impact on all our communities of color addressed. We cannot enable and justify racism any longer. And Andrea here says, Irish are quiet racists, but please remember that Irish see Irish in the context of what the characteristics of physical features. I saw the television interview, but where are you from? That was bad. This is coming from the most influential media in Ireland, Irish TV. This was done to George Floyd, and sadly, it was done to George in Ireland as well. And yeah, this is also something about art. instated a D&I strategy last year and is only now starting to bear fruits. We have to acknowledge progress. Just to digress a little bit, because I remember that I had this conversation with Mamobo, and it's just about, the involvement, and just riding off of what Sandrine said about getting Black people more involved, or getting more airspace for Black people on Irish TV or Irish media. But I think the conversation was, shouldn't it be more than a quota? Shouldn't it be stories that actually are important? Shouldn't it be more than just, we are creating a quota for Black people just so that they can have something? But it literally should be something more. It should be, it shouldn't just be shallow in the sense of, oh, we're just having a quota for Black people. It should be what conversations should be had, and who should be having these conversations, and who should be there doing these interviews and talking about Black people in Ireland. And the representation goes beyond interviewing Black people, but it is also about having Black people there doing the interviews. Just there again, another comment here says, some people spend so much energy justifying George's death rather than using their energy to tap into humanity. So disappointing. And there's so many comments here, but let's just quickly go on to the next question here, real quick. So yeah, you want
I remember before it goes again. Remember the way Sandrine said about the editor, why didn't he do his work? That's there, and he had on his LinkedIn and his thing that he's the chief editor of it. He's the chief editor that wrote that kind of a statement. And he changed it from thug to knife wielding man. So obviously, if he had changed his article, he had a kind of conviction that what I wrote was wrong. Till date, that man has still not given an apology or made a statement from him or his organization for the injustice he wrote down about George. And that's not okay. This is what I mean about calling people out on stuff.
Funmi, could I briefly interject just to say that in the conversation about the media, we should never exclude or disregard the public, because there's a sense of populism in the media. The media, after all, wants to give the public what the media thinks the public wants. So if we lived in a nation where there was a culture of anti-racism, where it was just unpopular to use the word thug to describe a Black person, the media wouldn't dare to do that, even though, as Vicky said, the individual who might have put out that article might have knew it was wrong, but still put it out because of racist inclinations. He wouldn't have dared to do that if he knew the Irish public was going to condemn him right after he put that out. So I think the media's activity is somewhat reflective of the public's kind of way of thinking. So there definitely needs to be a cultural shift in how we operate as a nation. When it comes to racism, on Gorm TV, one of the things that we kind of drew a consensus on in one of our episodes was that, culture changes everything. Before, the politicians were giving speeches about how Black Lives Matter and about how racism is bad, there was a cultural shift in the public, which made it unpopular to be a racist, which made racists feel uncomfortable, because you couldn't be a racist and walk around and think that you upheld the mainstream view, because you didn't. Before corporations released statements to try and appease to the consumer base and talk about how they care about Black lives, there was a cultural shift, which made it unpopular not to take stances against racism. So once we all, as an Irish nation, broaden the definition of Irishness, as Mamobo said, and ensure that your Irishness is not based on your whiteness or your Blackness, it's not based on the way you sound, the way you look, but it's based on your willingness to be a part of the Irish family. Once we broaden that definition, we'll then know that we're not dealing with racism as a Black issue, a Black community-based issue, but as an Irish problem that affects Black people that are a part of our Irish family. Once this cultural change occurs, the media wouldn't dare act in the way they did following George Nkencho's death.
That's a very good point. They did it because they knew they could get away with it, and that's something to consider. Andrew also here said Bashir's appearance with Tommy Tiernan was so valuable because it showed the Black men can be intelligent and articulate, and not just good rappers or sports players. That's very interesting, talking about the perception that people have. I've had someone say to me that it would be nice for them to reproduce with me, because that way they can have children who would play good football. And I know it was a very, very hilarious one. But yeah, just moving on there, let's talk about the legislation now and about around hate speech and talking about hate speech legislation. And this would be directed to both Buisir and Eric specifically, and anybody else can just butt in if you have something to say. So can you just give us a brief history on hate speech legislation in Ireland and where it is now at the
Eric, do you want to start or will I? Okay, fair enough. Yes, so technically speaking, we do have anti-hate speech or anti-hate crime laws, the 1989 Act of the prohibition to incitement to hatred. However, I believe since the enactment of that act, we've only ever had two convictions since 1989. We weren't recording it. So since it's been recorded, about 47, I don't have the accurate statistics with me, but about 47 actually made it to the courts, 10 of which were dismissed and 2 ended up in prison. That's since 1989. Just to go to show you in the first place that it's not that we, Ireland doesn't have hate crime, it's just that we're not recording it. And that's a major problem, not just with the system in terms of collecting statistics, but also with the police itself in terms of is it correct, and is it, I suppose, inputting the correct information? Is it capturing the bias motivation? Because that's what hate crime is. It's just any crime with the bias motivation. And the problem is we're not capturing that bias motivation. Again, I use the bullying versus racial abuse example in the school context, but that transpires all the way throughout the public sphere. And so although we do have the 1989 Act, it's very ineffective, very useless essentially. But the positive fact deriving from that is the Helen McEntee is actively working with the current replacement for that act, and even the Broadcast Authority of Ireland is also looking at online media regulation bill, looking at preventing hate crime again. So yeah, although we do have legislation, it's just ineffective because there needs to be that bias motivation again needs to be captured. And then again, because we don't have, I suppose, precedents to kind of guide us in terms of what this bias motivation may look like. And again, it's at the discretion of the courts. So if the judge doesn't think this is racist, for example, well then so be it, it's not racist. And again, if we're not capturing those types of data, those bias motivation, how can we possibly say there's a problem here and then therefore address it? For example, that article that went out Dublin Live, certainly would there be an argument for incitement to hatred, because as we've already explained, the word thug is a loaded term. The editor knew it was a loaded term, but in the chase for views, they disregarded Black bodies, and our Black lives didn't matter in that regard. So, that's a problem. So the sole purpose of using that word was to publish this as wide as possible, which is what the Act demands, that it needs to have wide spread, and it needs to be against a particular group of people, which in this case it is. But the problem is just that lack of effectiveness. It's just not effective when it gets from the police recording all the way to the courts. It's just ineffective, and so we do need new hate crime legislation ASAP. But it's a work in progress, so I suppose that's a positive.
Go on there, Eric.
Yeah, I think Buisir kind of outlaid the chronology of the kind of hate crime legislation here in Ireland really well. That's it essentially. It's been somewhat futile, the 1999 Act. Its application has not been very effective. It's not yielded any positive outcomes. You have it in place to ensure that we can minimize hate crime, but there's no robust attempt being made by the state to record hate crimes. There's no official database, for example, to record acts of like hate crimes, racism, or xenophobia. There's an unofficial one that has been put out by the Irish Network Against Racism called iReport, which is really good, but it's not state-sponsored, so it's not as effective as it could be had it had the support from the state. And the fact that the state has not committed to such an initiative, I think says a lot about where we're at right now in terms of the lack of systemic action to tackle racism and xenophobia in Ireland. And right now, I think in the conversation about hate speech, I think hate speech laws is but one element of what our attempt should be to tackle racism within Ireland. You know, in Germany, for example, Germany is a very, very strict when it comes to hate speech laws. They introduced a law, they have hate speech laws when it comes to actions on social media as well. Yet in 2015, I think hate crimes were at approximately 3,000 reported hate crimes, but in 2019, it jumped up to 8,000. This was partly because of the influx of immigrants and xenophobia, but it also might speak to the fact that hate speech legislation is not the be all and end all. We still need to add more elements to our conversation when it comes to racism, because, you know, criminal law, as Buisir knows, is all about preventing criminal activity, criminal action. So I'm prohibited by law to, let's say, assault somebody, but I still might have a mind of assault, the mind that someone who wants to assault someone would have. I still might have intentions in my mind to do it, even though I don't manifest it. So although hate speech legislation might prevent me and preclude me from being a racist, I might still be a racist. So we need to talk about how we can reach people, not just prevent them from manifesting racism, but we can reach them to convince them that their racist ideology is an illogical one. They need to shift away from it and adopt a better one that sees us moving forward progressively. So there needs to be a cultural approach that acknowledges people's thought and their ideological positions, but also a legislative one to stomp out racist manifestations within our nation.
Can I just add on to that? Just with what Eric was saying, but with that and with what Buisir was saying, I think like it has to kind of go from schools as well, though. So, you know, like it has to be taught from such a young age that like when you do experience a racist thing happening to you, that there are people that you can report it to. So like the one thing that with Lamar that we're doing, it is to kind of establish what are those policies like in schools or in colleges or in workplaces, because a lot of the time I think we had all brushed on that, like where racism is just brushed aside as bullying, do you know, or like you're just, I don't know, like trained in your head to be like, okay, like it's because I'm Black, then like that's just a given. But like it's because of the society that we live in that Black people have just been literally just trained to just take racism. And like that's why like it wasn't until like last year that we were speaking about like what had happened from like primary school. And like, you know, it wasn't until like you were talking to different people and you were like, oh my God, like, so this wasn't just an isolated incident, but how would that have been prevented if teachers were able to distinguish between racism and bullying? And like, and then with all of that, then that's how it like implements or like pushes for the need, as you say, for like legislation on hate crime or hate speech. But like it does kind of have to stem from the education system, stem from workplaces where, like, as you say, like racism isn't black or white, but it's like whoever is discriminated against knows that there is laws or there is something that is happening that they can report it to. Because until there is that, then it's like, of course, you're not going to get statistics or people reporting it because they don't want to, because what has come from it, like, as you've stated, like if this law was implemented in 1999 and like, I didn't even know about that, you know, like I literally, it's not until today you're speaking about it that you're like, oh, so there actually is a hate crime legislation. So it is to do with that, but it has to be taught in school then. So then if something does happen, that you know that like you are going to be protected within Ireland.
Sorry, go on.
Go on, Buisir. No,
I just wanted to add, because what Sandrine just said, that it's very important that education and representation are probably the two biggest assets we can have to fix racism within our society. And again, the people often don't like legislation because they think, oh, law means punishment. That's not the case. Remember that laws are there as a safeguard for where our humanity fails, so that we can be reminded or be deterred that, look at this fella, for example, you know, he was sanctioned so because he committed a hate crime. But where we don't have that, people go thinking about that they can act in whatever way that they want, and they let their privilege go unchecked. And that's a huge problem. And we need to remedy that at the educational level. And it's only when it comes to failing, which the stage we've reached, that's when legislation comes into play. And then there's the whole argument of, oh, you know, free speech versus hate speech. And the argument still applies that we won't need hate speech if you could just control your own free speech. We're not hindering free speech. We're just saying just be mindful of what you say. It's a very simple human characteristics that you be nice to your neighbor, you know? And I think, yeah, that's just a takeaway message from the hate crime legislation, not to see legislation as a punishment or as something to be feared, but rather to see as something that we shouldn't even have in the first place and go about making the change so that we shouldn't even need it. And that comes back to education. So yeah, I just want to tie that in together.
Thank you very much, Buisir. Just to talk about consequences for actions and talk about legislation. This is probably just rounding up. We're going to take questions after now. So if you have questions, just put them onto the comment section, and the panelists would be very happy to answer your questions. So, do you think that if these legislations are actively enacted and like things are actually being done, do you think that it can actually curb hate speech and you know, uncount things that are being said online, especially when it comes to online discourse? Do you think that people would be able to, you know, get reprimanded for the things that they say online? For example, I would say that in America, for example, if somebody said something racist against somebody, I think there was something that even happened in the UK recently where this guy made this video, very racist video, and people looked for him. They found where he worked, he got fired from his job, and things like that. And I don't think that those kind of things happen a lot in Ireland yet. But do you guys think that there can be consequences if these laws are properly implemented, especially online, with online bullying and online hate speech?
Do you want to take it, Buisir? Okay. Yeah, I think there would undoubtedly be a fear to commit these crimes, you know, if laws were in place. But I still kind of uphold the position, and I do think that there's one thing to prohibit these actions. There's another thing to, with education, prevent people from thinking in a way that would see them manifest racism in the first place. So I think we need to think sustainably, and we need to think holistically of the type of Ireland we want to create. Once you have these laws in check, as Buisir said, it creates a framework within which you can operate, without which you cannot go. However, in that framework, we should want people to not want to go with beyond the framework in the first place, because that's a society we want to build. So we should know the Ireland that we want and how we can use education to educate people as to who is Irish and how, again, your race does not define your Irishness. Therefore, you're not supposed to seclude people because of the color of their skin and treat them in a racist manner. In Germany, the social media laws in terms of hate speech are very robust. So on Facebook, I think they have 24 hours, Facebook specifically, to remove any flagged content that is marked as hate speech, or else they can be fined up to 50 million euros. So this is how robust it is in Germany. Here in Ireland, I think we definitely need to consider that. However, we should really want to reimagine our Ireland, a diverse Ireland with values that are inclusive and that are based on diversity, and try and take a holistic and sustainable approach to achieve that. Our penalization methods should not be one that discourages or disincentivizes people from wanting to not be racist, from wanting to be anti-racist. We should want people to find it attractive to be so, because they see other people as their brethren, irregardless of the color of their skin. So I just advocate for a holistic, sustainable approach to inclusivity and diversity in Ireland.
Now that's a really interesting take, and I think that it is a shift in discourse. Instead of saying, you know what, we're going to punish you, go ahead, do the wrong thing and get punished, but you're saying no, actually you can actually not do the wrong thing and take responsibility for your actions, and there wouldn't even be a need for this in the first place. Interesting one there, and it just bounces back off this question that was asked here that says, what are your views on government policies on racism? I think that's already covered now. Just to see if we have more questions here. This comment here says, banter is my least favorite word because it is used to mask and excuse microaggression and abuse. This one says, real change begins when people humble themselves, when they're willing to be open to a perspective outside of their own. I've had many conversations where people were so quick to defend or share that they too have experienced hate, hurt, etc., that they completely disregard the issue at hand. That's true, because it's very interesting that sometimes you come and say, oh, this is what happened to me. And it's like, well, I experience it too. And that kind of invalidates what the person has come to say, because it's not about you. If someone came to talk about something, then you address that. If you had an issue, then you address it at another time, or later on after that one has been addressed. This one says racism starts with family attitudes, embedding racist views in their children. Eric, I'm sorry, but the UK has had hate speech legislation and racial integration for years and multiculturalism, but there is still racism and abuse. German.
Let me very briefly say that I know I'm not advocating for, I'm not talking about the sustainable approach that I try to advocate for, eradicating racism in its entirety. I think the goal should be to minimize it and to ensure that as we do so, we're disincentivizing racism so that people are not just not manifesting racism, but still being racist, but not being racist in the first place. And that's kind of what I'm advocating for. And also, can I say, to refer to what Sandrine and Mamobo said earlier, there's somewhat of a humorous irony in how people in Ireland at times are unwilling to accept what Mamobo termed as bi-cultural identity, when we in Ireland have a profound history of emigration, of going to America, for instance, and settling there and creating our own version of American identity. The Irish American community is profound and strong and has a very strong place in the American society. We're willing to accept complexity when it comes to our identities in particular places. But when it comes to migrants coming here to try and create their own form of complex identity, we're quick to disregard it. And in terms of racism, we have, again, a profound history of dealing with colonial racism here in Ireland. We've been treated by England in a quite in a ferocious way, to be blunt, when it comes to racism and how we've had to face it. Yet when it comes to communities within our own country facing racism, our history with racism, it sees us not wanting to acknowledge the fact that here in Ireland we can be racist, which is just ironic. Surely it should lead us to empathize with communities that face racism here in Ireland, but we just have a paradoxical reaction to racism, which I think is wrong, and we need to check it and correct it politically, legislatively, and socially, and educationally, as Buisir and Sandrine said, very quickly.
Thank you for that, Eric. I think I was gone for a little bit. If you have any questions whatsoever, please leave your questions there in the chat section, and we can ask any of the panelists can just take up your question. Shane here says, vast majority of Irish teachers have never had any anti-racism training. Improving that situation would and should be a key step for future change. And that's really interesting, right? Off of what Sandrine said about the works of Limerick Movement Against Racism, where, one of the ideas would be to go ahead and educate teachers and people in teaching institutions on, especially at the grassroots level with little children in primary schools and secondary schools, getting them to know more about this. Still, let's just circle back again. If you have any questions, please, you can just leave that in the chat section and we'll be addressing them. Just to briefly say generally, like in the most general sense of it, where do you think is the next step from here for Black Irish people, for Ireland, a way to curb the thing that happened with George and to make sure that that is not a thing in Ireland, because America has had to fight it, and to think that America is going through that and we can see it, and it's very good to guide against it and to make sure that it doesn't get to the point where a Black person is afraid of being stopped by the police in Ireland. So what do we do? What is the step from here? I'll have Buisir go first.
Sure. We need to be more vocal, and I know it's us here sitting in the panel and our generation that has to do kind of that heavy lifting, because our parents, I don't want to belittle them, but to be honest, they couldn't do much because they were here as first migrants, so they had to, comply with immigration rules. They couldn't be outspoken. But we, with our dual nationality or our biculturalism, if you will, are opportuned because we know how to maneuver both identities, and we know what works, and we know how to get into the larger system. And so we need to be more vocal. And I always use the hashtag unmute yourself, because I'm trying to encourage Black men in particular to just speak out about the issues, because white people, white Irish people generally, or genuinely rather, don't understand. There are things that they say that, you know, they think it's okay. And it just needs a little bit of education. Now, the problem is, how do we do that when the large majority of our friends are of a white ethnic origin? How do we engage in discussions and say, hey, you can't really say, you know, I'm your Black friend, you know, I'm just your friend, you know, you don't have to add the Black. How do you have those discussions without losing friends, without losing allies? The amount of apologies I've had to make to my DCU colleagues and say, I'm so sorry about all the trolls you're getting just by, you know, because you added me or something, you know, so all that baggage that I have to, you know, apologize for just by virtue of my Blackness. And that's something we need to start eradicating from our society. And the only way to do that is be outspoken and say, no, we are not going to, look, this is racism. Look, I know it's uncomfortable. I know you don't like that term, but it is what it is. And we can't hide it anymore. We just need to be quite transparent and be realistic with ourselves. We can't hide. We can't hide it anymore. We can't say, we can't pretend that it's in a faraway country, because we now know that it could very well be our next door neighbor. Judge Floyd, the policeman who killed him, was working with him for 20 years. How frightening must that be to imagine someone you work with for such a long time could have all this, you know, inbuilt hatreds towards you. And that's the type of feeling that Black men across the world, or in Europe at least, and certainly in the Western Hemisphere, are looking at.
Buisir, you're muted.
Sorry, you've missed me. So I'm getting passionate again. But the point is that we just need to be vocal, and we just need to call it out. Racism is racism. There's no, oh, I'm not racist, or I don't see color. Fam, if you don't see racism, you are racist, because you're refusing to acknowledge that you have a privilege. I don't have that privilege not to say anything, because it could very well be me. The only difference between me and George is the fact that I don't have that mental illness to know that I can't just go into society and act this way. I have that mental capacity. Not every Black person does, and that's a myth we need to, you know, to stamp out, because we do have mental health problems. Just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean they're non-existent. We don't talk about it because we've been stereotyped as, you know, violent, aggressive men. So we have to have, well, no, we don't have to, but the point is that we need just to fight those stereotypes and show that we are more than our color. We are more than our pigmentation, and that we are as we are, despite that, you know, adjective, Black or whatever you have, you know, and just be vocal and just say, you know, my friend, you are being racist. I'm going to talk to you about this and explain the situation to you. You probably won't like it, but we'll probably fight. Tomorrow I'll check up on you, but you have to be willing to change, that it's wrong. And that's simply it. You're going to lose friends. And it's such a very sad situation, very, very sad situation. Because it's unfortunate that these people you've grown up with, I remember I have a very close friend, and she put, she became woke, as they say. And so she started saying, oh no, you know, don't touch my hair and things like that. And she, you know, she'd get friends from a primary school or secondary school, they saying, oh, never knew you felt like that. Sorry, you know, have a good life. You know, you don't want to lose friends in that way. But if that's the situation, if you have to cut people that are toxic in your life who aren't listening to your own grievances, well, then how can you rely on them in life, generally speaking? And so you need that support at the root level and at the public level. And if they're not there, if you're not vocal, how are you going to tell people that you need support? And so we need to be vocal, I think is what I'm trying to say. We need to unmute ourselves and just be vocal about it and call it out. There will be, we need to be strong. There might be repercussions, but we need to power on.
Thank you very much, Buisir. It's very interesting that you use the word unmute there. So who would like to go next? Mamobo, would you like to go next? Just talking about where is the way forward now?
Yeah, apologies for covering my mic. My internet was just unstable, so I just moved closer to the internet. But just I've been listening in, and just in terms of moving forward, I think for like structural ways moving forward, as we've discussed previously, like the people in power positions are generally a monolith. Let's say they all look the same, have the same socioeconomic background, generally male. We need to actually have policies. We need to have things in place, trainings, education in place for them to understand the particular needs of they understand. There's a lot of training and things in place for like understanding the needs of first generation migrants or new migrants in the country, but there's not a lot of policies and research and like trainings in place, education in place for these people in power positions to actually understand the particular needs of this, let's say, bicultural or multicultural people, youth, children, people. So we need to have those kind of things in place and people willing to do those trainings. Because when we look at we can say there's children and principal, children bullying and things like that. But a lot of the time it's the principal that says as well, oh, it's just bullying. So there's not a need to be, we don't need to do anything about it. So we need to have structures in place to actually hit it from the top and have it trickle down in the bottom as well. So we need, and that kind of stems into my own research as well, manifesting from that. But we need those kind of things in place to educate, let's say, the police, educate the principals, educate the policymakers, educate the people that are in those power positions, making decisions for us, and have us there as well in the table too, to actually have the things in place that it will trickle down and make it a more cohesive society for everyone. That's kind of a lot of the things I'm thinking of in terms of moving forward.
Thank you very much there, Mamobo. I know that Vicky, Eric, and Sandrine would have to go. I just want to slide in these questions because we don't have a lot of time left. Just slide us in, and if you can just answer them with your submissions, that would be amazing. This person has just said something. Jessica says very great things about you, Eric, and then she goes on to ask a question about imagine. What can we do to reimagine and understand that the Irish family is at its best when it's diverse and inclusive media storytelling? I would love to hear ideas, and I think that's part of what we're sharing at the moment. So thank you for being here. And the next question would be, I'm really interested in how native Irish people can call out racism effectively without misrepresenting multicultural communities in Ireland. This might at first sound ignorant, but the last thing I want to do while calling out racism is to reinforce ideas that misrepresent the diversity that exists in Ireland and multicultural communities. So if you can just answer that as well.
Yeah, thanks for the question to both people, commentators or comment droppers. In terms of the first one, reimagining the definition of being an Irish person, I actually think a lot of people have these conversations. I think these conversations are being had a lot in America, especially post George Floyd. How can we redefine the image of an American to encompass Black America and white America? Here in Ireland, in terms of that conversation, I don't think it needs to be as complicated as we think it does need to be. I think it's just appealing to our common humanity, looking at the things we have in common. After all, we're all merely human beings with slight cultural differences and different, the melanin in my skin is slightly more concentrated than in the skin of another person, an ethnically Irish person. These are minute, negligible differences. Apart from that, as Sandrine said, all I know is Ireland. I spent the majority of my life here in Ireland. My Indigenous background influences the way I navigate life, but nonetheless, I believe I have a stake in this country because I was born and raised here, and I'm proud to be a part of this country. So that common love we have for Ireland, our common humanity, these things unite us if we allow them to. I think the thing that is occurring when it comes to how we interact with one another as human beings is unification. Until we put in blockades like racism and discrimination and xenophobia to prevent that like natural flow of unification, I think we need to recognize each other's common humanity and embrace one another. Allow this like process of embracing to bleed into our politics, bleed into the policy making, to bleed into the media, and allow it to naturally flow and permeate our society. I think this is all it takes. I think remembering our history as Irish people, as I said earlier, understanding that the Irish are renowned for contacting colonial racism emanating from England and overcoming that racism. So we don't want to create the similar barriers to the ones that we have faced throughout our history for communities within this country. So upon the basis of our history, we need to empathize with communities within Ireland that are contacting and facing racism. And I think that it all involves empathy. So upon that basis of empathy, we can progress and do fantastic things within our nation. This conversation is a novice conversation. We have not had it on a societal-wide basis thus far in Ireland, but everyone has a role to play in raising their voice, unmuting yourself, as Buisir said, and pioneering this conversation going forward in Ireland.
Thank you very much for that, Eric. Do you want to take that on as well, Sandrine?
Yeah, I think like the reimagining of Ireland, it's kind of to embrace difference. And I think it kind of goes into that whole essence of like the fear of the other, the fear of the unknown. And like that's where you're really from comes into it. You know, it's because you look nothing like me, so you can't be Irish. So, you know, so things like that. So like, but like the only way to move forward is to just understand like Ireland is multicultural, Ireland is diverse, you know, from like the Ireland that I knew growing up is completely different now, you know, and it's completely different from my little brothers who were born in Ireland. Like this is all they know. So like when someone does say like go back to where you come from, they're like Kilkenny, like, you know, that's all they know. So it is just understanding and being comfortable by like if you're walking down the road and you see a Black man, an Asian man, a Pakistani, you're not going to be like, they're not Irish, they're not this. Like just live with life, like, you know, like just deal with it. Like it is that sense. It's like it's a changing time, and like it's always going to be changing. And like if you, like with what Eric was saying with that unity, like if you just let the fear of the other, like if you're just so held bound with the sense of Irishness means whiteness, everything like this, then you're not going to move forward. And then we are always going to be those barriers, as Eric again was saying. Then that's how racism, everything like that stems in. But like if you just imagine Ireland as like a home for everyone, and the fact that someone just doesn't look like you but still has an Irish accent, that should just connect you. It's just that human level of, oh, so you know Sligo, oh, so do I. Like it should just, because it happens like with Irish Americans. Like why is it that someone who has never been in Ireland but like their grandfather visited Nina can have a more connection with a white Irish person than me who has been in Ireland since I was 10? Do you know, it's just that whiteness there. So it is just dealing with it, that people who don't look like you can also claim to be Irish, and that it's not even claim to be Irish, they are Irish. And like, so by just accepting that and just understanding like how Irish identity is just so nuanced and it's so fluid and it just fits in every different directions, then only then can we kind of just imagine a better Ireland, like where multicultural and diversity, like all of that seeps into like education, like even with the media, with principles, like just seeing Black people like in a new light, like in power, anything like that. Like it's just not going to be anything wrong or anything strange, because we've just learned to deal with it and just live peacefully there. So like I just think it is just understanding that Irishness doesn't mean whiteness, and then someone who just does not look like you should just, on the basis of them just being a human, you should just have empathy in that regard.
All right. Just before we get to you, Vicky, there's a question here from Mamobo specifically. So this person says, when can we begin? It's been a long process and the valleys have been too low and the peaks too high. I have experienced racism growing up, still do, and I've seen it towards my son from a toxic school establishment. A lot of these other questions, we're talking about the roles that schools can play in educating the students and getting them to understand the essence of cultural difference and racism, and to change their attitude towards that. Yeah, do you want to go for that, Mamobo?
So thanks for that question. I think in terms, I'm really sorry for the experiences that you and your child have had. I don't know the person's name here, but I think in terms of like education and how we can change education in Ireland, I think what we really need to do is, like again said from before, is start from the top and start from, sorry if you can hear me, start from the top and have that education in terms of policy for the people in power. So let's say the principals, let's say the teachers. We need to have obviously there is a disparity in diverse teachers in majority, like the primary and secondary level, but we need to have that education there for the teachers, because obviously right now there's not that education there for them. But we need to have the policies, and we need to have the training there for teachers, the principals, to understand the differences in and challenges in the children that they have, because we see the schools are very, very, like when me growing up, my family moved here when I was 3, and I didn't see any of that. I didn't see anyone that looked like me in like primary level or secondary level. But now the schools are so diverse, but yet the teachers are not as diverse as the schools. So we need the teachers to be more diverse to reflect the schools, but as we're moving towards that, those policies and trainings in place for the teachers to be aware of the things that are happening within the students, we need that kind of change, and we need that moving forward in the future. So that's what I'm kind of working on. I have colleagues as well that are working on this as well, training teachers, training principals, training any people in the school systems to have them more aware of this sort of like context that we're having here in Ireland. I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you, Mamobo. Yeah, that sounds very interesting, and it is, the education bit cannot be overemphasized. It is the grassroots and the basis for everything. So Vicky, do you have anything that you think that you would like to add to this?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I feel like it should start from home, from Ireland. I've met some people who are like, I kind of personally feel that Irish people who are well-traveled, as in they've moved to the UK, Australia, or somewhere in the world, are more open-minded and not as racist as people in here that live in Ireland. You know what I mean? Like for me, what I've experienced is there's two type of like white Irish people. There's the type that'll say to you, "Oh, sure, that's a very dope accent. Where are you from originally?" And that means, I know the difference. Don't laugh, Eric. I know the difference. That means like you're Black, you're not from here. Like where are you from? And say, for example, if I say, "Oh, I'm Irish," they're like, "Where's your mom from?" I'm like, "She's Irish." Then they're like, "Oh, where's your grandfather from?" They want to go bring it back to like your ancestry line, DNA, and I have to explain where I'm from. But then you'll meet the other type of Irish people, be like, automatically I'll be like, "Oh, I'm Congolese." They're like, "What do you mean you take?" I mean, like, are you from South Dublin or North Dublin? And then the two of us start laughing because it's like so awkward, but it's just your mindset. I feel like we need to like educate ourselves, as in you said, Ireland is so diverse. Because I fear for my kids who are born here. I came when I was 6, but they are born here. As in the Rotunda Hospital, when they grow up and they're like, "Where are you from originally?" They're like, "I'm born here." They're like, "Yeah, but where's your mom from?" "My mom's Irish, but she's Congolese Irish, she's Black Irish." But then do they still have to continue this whole ancestry thing? And in schools as well, I remember when I was in school and they did, the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and the word nigger was in the book. I remember that day I died, and the teacher made me read, and that word, everybody staring at me. I was sweating. Oh my gosh, back then I had hair extensions, so my scalp was sweating. And then I read the word nigger, and they were just staring. It was so uncomfortable. We need to stop this crap. Can you please teach the kids books that show, even like Becoming by Michelle Obama, or A Promised Land by Obama, so then Black kids or people in general, the kids in class, can learn certain things like about where they come from and what their purpose is. We need to change the narrative, but we have to start from our way up. I feel like our generation we know so much more than our parents knew, as Bashir said earlier. They're like first generation. They're afraid of their citizenship. Us, we're so lucky, that a lot of us are like Irish citizen, and you're Black. You're baddie. Our parents would have only dreamt of what we have. We're very educational. A lot of us have gone to school and different things, like our mind is so things. So let's use the policies that we have at hand and work our way down. Let's impose bills and acts and like this and that, and call people out. Don't be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you," but no, I'm not sorry for offending you, for making a stupid racist comment and ignorant comment that you couldn't say at this time and you feel uncomfortable. Yes, Buisir, yes. Be like, I'm not sorry for that. Call people out on this because it's not okay. Like, it's enough. I'm actually sick of it. It's enough. No. I think that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Vicky. This was a very, 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 very interesting conversation. And if you did not take anything out of this conversation, 1, education, 2, please raise your voice, unmute. If those are the only 2 things you take out of this conversation, it is enough. Educate yourself, educate others, talk to your friends, talk to people around you, create awareness about this, and don't be afraid to talk. Don't be afraid to speak up, because if you don't talk about it, then somehow it would affect you. And you might say that you're not Black, it might not affect you, but let's look into the future, and there's a generation coming, and it's going to be a much more multicultural Ireland, and somehow it would get to you. So if we can all just come together and just create a much better Ireland for everybody. And yes, we want to again say RIP to George. We do hope that his soul rests in perfect peace. And thank you so much, guys, for being a part of this conversation. It is 7:30. We wouldn't want to keep you any longer. Thank you so much for all your comments. They've been very amazing. And before we leave, we just want to say a quick thank you as well to our sponsors. We want to say a big thank you to Doras and to Limerick Movement Against Racism. And of course, a big shout out to Mamobo for bringing all of this together. And thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, Buisir. Thank you for taking time out to be here and to do this. Thank you, guys.